Melanie and a man awkwardly sit out on a porch of a house. Within the house are voices of people enjoying a party, but Melanie and the man decided to take a break from the goats and booze, hence why they're perched outside. Melanie starts to show signs of frustration and tiredness, and the man tries to create an interaction by pointing out how some people got intimate on one of the floors inside the house party. Melanie states she isn't interested in talking about people being intimate, and on what floor they carried out their intimacy. She tells the man she's going through a lot at the very moment and would even prefer to talk about the man's life instead. The man, a graphic designer, talks about spending the day designing a logo for a coffee shop that will likely go down the drain in 2 weeks tops. The man is still talking when Melanie cuts in and mentions her predicament in her relationship, but she senses her insensitivity towards the man's ordeal and acknowledges his plight, praising him instead. The praise is, however, not heartfelt, as she only wanted to come off as being friendly and understanding. She states that she and her boyfriend tried to break up on the phone, but he stalled, citing he had to step out. The man appraises the situation and claims it can serve as a period of reevaluating the relationship and deciding to stay in it. He infers that they should both go on and have a rethink about the next step and direction. The man advises her to be the one to break the relationship, instead of waiting and stalling, and she says it can get hard, as her boyfriend has his ways around situations. She mentions her boyfriend's ability to argue things in his favor, making it difficult to make a case for herself most times. The man advises her to look carefully into their mode of conversations so as to better communicate. Melanie's phone rings and the man leaves her to return inside. It's his boyfriend on the phone, and Melanie informs him she's walking away from the party. When she leaves the party, she takes a stroll down the street. Back at the party, everyone's drinking and chatting, but Melanie, on the other hand, is walking down a lonely path while talking on the phone with her boyfriend. She suggests to him the idea of them making time to see each other in person more often. He misreads her choice of words, and this brings a little back and forth. He reminds her their numerous video calls and how interesting those calls normally are. Then he offers to switch their phone call to a video, but she reiterates her disdain for video calls with him. Melanie sits on a porch, still on the phone. The boyfriend states his desire to not let her go, and Melanie tells him his failure to do a little more severed their relationship. She is moody and somber, but states her intention to hang up the call, as that would signify the end of their relationship. She eventually hangs up and wears a sad and heavy countenance. Melanie is having a nice meal at a local diner with Martins, and Martins enjoys his meal with Melanie, who is still wearing a sad face. He assures her the breakup was inevitable and they only tried to push to the end. She admits that breakups are perturbing, even if they are a definite decision and properly planned, just as in her case. Melanie and Martins step out to meet another friend, Jeannie. They share a hug and Melanie shares jokingly how depressed she is and in need of help. Melanie reveals her good sense of humor and uses it around her friends a lot, with Jeannie admitting that's exactly why she's around. Melanie compliments Jeannie's appearance, and Martins says he has some errands to run, so he won't be leaving with them. The moment Martins leaves, Jeannie offers Melanie the chance to get a pedicure and a manicure. She suggests going to get ice cream and other fun activities that would help put her in a good place. Jeannie excitedly talks about them possibly drinking milk in the park, and she infers that this is needed so Melanie can properly go through the process of getting over the breakup. They are in the middle of a park, sitting and having a chat, when Jeannie complains about the law that stops people from drinking publicly. Jeannie pours liquor from a concealed bottle into her cup, while she looks around to make sure no one's spying to snitch on her. She wonders out loud why people can drink in their homes and in the club, but can't do so in the park, and Melanie makes her see reasons why the law is not so bad. They cheer and drink, and Jeannie acknowledges the cops around, suggesting they take care so they don't get caught. Melanie reveals how upset but also relieved she is about the breakup, and Jeannie tells her she'll be fine in a few months. Melanie shares her supposed advantages the breakup has with regards to her time and money, and asserts she's happy she wouldn't have to stay up on long calls with anyone again. She also states she wouldn't age to pay certain bills like when she was with her ex, and she's happy there'll be constant emailing with him, as she confirms it was a draining exercise for her. Jeannie concurs and tries to lift her spirit. Jeannie thinks Melanie now has time to invest in her dressing and clothing accessories, and she urges Melanie not to see her admonishment the wrong way, which Melanie accepts. Jeannie further admits Melanie has a drowsy look and needs to have a different, more energetic appearance. Jeannie does pause the whole dressing review to tell Melanie how amazing she thinks her friend is. Melanie is at the office working on her computer when Michael walks in. They exchange pleasantries, and Michael tells her a particular design for a job needs remodeling. She agrees she could add some retouching to the design, and Michael worries about offloading too many jobs on her. She assures him of her ability to get the jobs done, and Michael, knowing she'll have to multitask, makes sure she's in good shape doing the remodeling and her previous task. Melanie closes from work and meets up with Jeannie on a deserted road. They share pleasantries and a hug, then Melanie talks about how fine her day has been. Jeannie, on the other hand, contrasts with how scary her day has been and says there's a probability they'll have to pay off workers, as her company is seriously having a hard time. Melanie then suggests they go get some drinks to take their mind off gloomy situations. Melanie and Jeannie hang out with some friends, and they chat and laugh over drinks when Louis walks in. He's introduced to everyone by his old classmate, Martins, who is seated already on the table. Martins reminds Melanie and Louis they've met previously at his place, and they both remember the previous meeting and exchange pleasantries. Melanie then asks Louis to get a glass so she can get him some beer as she's in charge of the drinks. Louis mentions that he just moved back into the state a few weeks ago, and studying in the university had taken him away from Toronto, where he has all his childhood memories. They're in the process of catching up with Louis's life when Jeannie asks about Louis' occupation. He responds he's a media buyer, so they ask him what a media buyer does. He acts like he's about to break it down for them but ends up making a huge joke out of it. Luckily, Louis' sense of humor is contagious enough to have everyone laughing. Melanie gets tired and a bit tipsy and wants to take her leave. She guzzles the remaining beer in her glass and says her goodbye. Then she hops on her bicycle and rides off, with the sky gloomy and cloudy, ready to let the rain down. While on the road riding back to her apartment, the rain starts to pour. She tries to ride faster so as to avoid getting drenched by it, but it proves fruitless and she gets soaked in it. It's late in the evening when she gets home and searches for a particular wine in the cupboard, but she doesn't find it. Her flatmate, Chris, comes out telling her Claire is asleep and they hush their voices. Claire apparently is Chris's girlfriend, and Melanie asks Chris if he saw the wine she's looking for. He replies that he's sure she's already consumed it, insinuating Melanie drinks quite a lot. He goes in and gets her another bottle, and she offers him some, to which he agrees. He steps away to get a glass for himself and joins Melanie in drinking the wine. Over their glasses, he asks Melanie how she's holding up, considering her recent relationship status. She remarks on the unease that comes with breaking up and how it constantly makes her feel a little bit weird. She also jokingly tells him when he breaks up with Claire, he'll understand better. He brushes the statement aside and points out her drunk state is responsible for her callous remark. Melanie asks if he and Claire were being intimate before her arrival, and he replies that was not the case as Claire is really sleeping. He mentions the timing of their lovemaking, and he remarks they usually do it before 9 and a few times a week. Melanie feels that might be too much information and tries to squash the discussion. He continues to mention timing and places they carry out lovemaking, and Melanie remains eager to know if they were actually getting intimate when she stepped in. He tells her he was making artistic notes for the community campaign, and he states his intention to show her the art note he made, as Claire isn't interested in seeing them. He steps in to get the notes for Melanie to see, and when Melanie sees them, she acknowledges his continued hard work. Melanie praises his work and encourages the beauty of it, mentioning exactly how she feels the notes address the community. Melanie also thanks him for making her night and goes to her room to finish off some jobs on her laptop before sleep calls. The brothers, Louis and Patrick, are having a discussion in Patrick's sitting room. They're contemplating who gets to use the TV and who gets to use the computer. Patrick tries to fix the computer so Louis can use it, with Patrick snidely remarking on Louis' love for pornography, and how he can watch all the porn he wants on the computer once it's fixed. Louis finds it awkward when Patrick talks about his love for porn, and they switch gears to Louis' preference in taking their grandpa's flask. Patrick mentions his desire to have the flask instead, but Louis reminds his brother of his privilege as the first grandchild, hence why he should have the flask. Louis' phone rings and it's Martins, the guy who introduced him to Melanie, and the others, so he responds he'll send Patrick down to pick him up. While on the elevator going up, Patrick states his desire to go into filmmaking, and Martins encourages him, elaborating on the advantages of the career path to him. They share a joke and laugh over it, giving a solid meaning to mixing business with pleasure. Louis is with a friend on the balcony of the apartment, and Louis expresses his feelings on moving to Toronto. He thanks his friend for inviting him out the day before and how those kind of meetings will help his social life, as he is concerned about the stagnancy of it. He mentions how interesting his job is, how his bosses are cool, and infers his time in Toronto already looks amazing. Louis walks through the streets of Toronto, enjoying the scenery. He goes to the market to buy some stuff and continues his stroll down the street where he bumps into Melanie, scaring her because he has a tongue in his hand. They reintroduce themselves, and Louis wows Melanie with his sense of humor. Melanie reveals her indecisiveness picking certain things she came for, and Louis offers to help by offering different options available. Louis changes the discourse, stating his need for a place where they sell good coffee, and Melanie indicates she plans on getting some too. They seem to already enjoy each other's company, and they set out together. While on their way, they catch up on themselves, Melanie taking the opportunity to tell him nice things about the city and the people's behavioral pattern. She states how nice people in Toronto can be towards each other, then they share some childhood memories while they walk. Louis relates how he didn't do much when he was a teenager and alludes to being introverted while growing up. He says after he left for the university, he started doing all he missed during his teenage years. By the time they get a place to sit at the coffee shop, they're exchanging jokes and expressing they're at ease with each other. Still catching up on themselves, Louis admits to not being comfortable in crowded places, and would rather prefer to be in a secluded area. Melanie states she experiences excessive anxiety and emotional distress from time to time. She infers she understands Louis, and this begins to look like they have a lot in common. Melanie then seeks to know Louis's state of mind after moving back to Toronto, and Louis divulges. Louis mentions his failed desire to discover himself the minute he left the university. He states the process of discovering oneself gets hampered by too many activities like finding a job, getting a wife, raising a family, and the likes. Melanie confirms it happens to everyone and it takes a conscious effort to discovering oneself. Melanie reveals that she made a resolution that she'll no longer try to find herself as she believes people never do find themselves. She opines that those who she thinks have figured themselves out end up having a lot to work on in their personal lives. She believes the process of finding oneself is never ending. Melanie and Louis start walking further into the street, reaching the front of an apartment that has two siblings selling some properties. She suggests Louis gets a bicycle to aid his mobility around the city, and the seller mentions his sentiments towards the bicycle before announcing a price. Louis brings all the cash he has and hands it over to the seller, including his tongue, hoping to seal the deal. The seller accepts the tongue, fine with selling it so as to meet the initial asking price of the bicycle. As the sun shines and creates piercing rays through the leaves, Melanie and Louis take the long ride back. Louis and Melanie meet up with Jeannie and the other guys on a field. They are glad to see themselves and Louis is drawn to the badminton field. Jeannie sits with Melanie and busybodies about the truth behind Melanie, and Louis meet up. Melanie feels like she's under glaring interrogation and Jeannie makes light of the situation, asking Louis rhetorically what they can expect from him. Melanie and the other ladies catch up and discuss their preference in men. Melanie tells them she can't date a bald or a man with gray hair. They laugh over this, and after a while, Melanie joins Louis as a pair on the badminton field. While playing together, Louis casually catches Melanie and throws his hand around her waist, causing them to share hugs and laughs intermittently. The next scene begins with Louis and Melanie sharing the same bed, both their clothes littered around the room. While Louis is fast asleep, Melanie is wide awake. Louis wakes up to Melanie's smile greeting him, and he returns it. She then mentions she's hungry with a lingering smile, suggesting the night spent with Louis was interesting. Louis directs Melanie to the fridge to get something to eat, but Melanie eludes tiredness and Louis picks on it, suggesting they go out for breakfast instead. She jumps at the idea, and they get out of bed to dress up. Melanie goes back to her apartment and meets Claire making breakfast. They greet awkwardly as Chris walks in. He greets Melanie in a way that suggests he's very aware of the reason she slept out, but Melanie pays him no mind. She enters her room, takes off her jacket, and falls tiredly in bed. Dawn sits on a bench in the park when Melanie meets her. They share a hug and Dawn is chewing her salad when Melanie makes the big reveal: she slept with Louis. Dawn wants to know how it went and Melanie mentions the sex was good, but she feels indifferent about certain things. She thinks sleeping with Louis came too fast considering she just broke up, and she believes she could have taken at least 6 months before considering someone else. Dawn tells her she doesn't see the big deal and tells Melanie not to worry too much about it. Jeannie, who is also present, needs to know if Louis and Melanie will get intimate again. This leads them to discuss Louis's probable mind on if he'd love to continue a causal relationship with Melanie, but she, however, prefers not to rush things with Louis. The mood shifts gear when Melanie takes a big bite from her burger and messes up her clothes, causing some heartfelt giggles. Louis drinks a beer while he's on the phone. He leaves a voicemail for Melanie seeking to know how she's faring and invites her out for dinner only if she's free. Within a short while, he picks up the phone again and drops another voicemail for Melanie asking the same thing, emphasizing that it's based only on if she's free. Hell-bent on some company, he calls an old friend, Dave, and asks to meet him. Almost immediately, Dave comes around and picks him up with his 2 kids at the back of the car. They chat and catch up on their lives, with Louis relaying his deepest feeling of needing something he outrightly can't place his hands on. Dave advises him to get a child and that feeling would go away. Louis mentions he met someone already in Toronto, and Dave encourages him to take it slow and watch out for vibes they can create. It's late in the evening, and the electricity bulbs all around the city shine through the darkness. Louis is walking back while he bounces a tennis ball on the floor. Chris is having a function at his art gallery, and the gallery is filled with people admiring his work and commending his skills. He has a chat with his parents, his mom showing off her little sense of humor. Chris mentions that those buying his art in this particular function are people he's never met. He further states that his friends aren't buying, but are there for the free drinks. Melanie jokingly offers to pay little cash and do the dishes back at home as part of the payment for his artwork. Melanie steps out of her apartment the next day and walks down the street with Louis' voicemail playing in the background. He states that he misses Melanie a lot, struggles to say anything more tangible, and asks Melanie to call him if she would. Melanie gets a sausage on her way and meets Josie. They exchange pleasantries, and Josie tells Melanie she bought a condominium is on her way to seal the deal. Melanie expresses excitement on her behalf. Melanie finally meets Louis after a long wait, and they share a hug and a peck with Louis, thanking her for coming. Showing modesty, she thanks Louis for also coming and compliments him for wanting to know her properly. He remarks how awkward getting to know certain things about her feels at the moment, as they should have done that earlier, but hopes they can start off by Melanie sharing what she does for a living. Melanie answers she's a project manager but feels like what she does at work entails more. They decide to take a ride in their respective bicycles down a steep road. Louis allows Melanie to take the lead because she knows the area better. They continue their ride to a path with bushes on both sides, and they end their ride by a river to sit on the rocks by the riverbank. Louis brings out a chocolate and 2 cans of beer with Melanie, jokingly remarking Louis' intent is to make her fat. Melanie and Louis enjoy their can of beer, then smile at each other sheepishly, gradually bringing their faces closer. Shortly, their lips lock in a passionate kiss, and Louis tries to prolong the kiss, but Melanie gets uncomfortable and Louis apologizes. She corrects the impression and states she feels sweaty, hence explaining her pullback, and Louis makes her feel better. In a different moment, Louis sees a cricket game with a friend and seems disturbed, recounting his meeting with Melanie. He thinks there's a connection with her but further remarks how awkward it gets anytime something physical initiates. His friend encourages him that it might be just his mind, then advises him to stay on and find his rhythm. The friends head over to some place like a service apartment, seemingly out of town. Melanie meets Louis and they conclude one of them would sleep on the floor while the other on the bed. Louis, Chris, and Martins are outside sipping beer and discussing, while every other person chats in groups and pairs. Jeannie is in the kitchen, slicing some tomatoes and trying to make a meal while Melanie meets Louis outside as he plays baseball. She stops for a little chat before continuing her walk. Louis, Melanie, and Martins take a swim in the river, and the scene keeps interchanging with different groups chatting and having fun. After a short while, dinner is ready and everyone is seated around a floor table. Louis proposes a toast and cheers to everyone for making the outing possible. He expresses his joy in being able to make it to the hangout, and Melanie cheers to Chris's ability to finally be in a place without his girlfriend, causing laughter. Jeannie asks if she can talk about politics while at the dining table. Melanie sits across Louis and constantly keeps stealing glances at him. Everyone's discussion over dinner varies, depending on their personal lives. It's late in the evening, and they step out to make a bonfire, but Melanie remains inside. They discuss how interesting a bonfire is while they sip drinks, and Chris talks about making a sculpture of the fire born to everyone's delight and approval. Louis notices Melanie's absence and finds a way to meet her inside. He feels Melanie is acting weird towards him and wants to know why. She reiterates her confusion recently and Louis states plainly his likeness for Melanie, expressing how he doesn't want to force down an expectation. He infers his wish that everything goes smoothly between them. While every other person is outside, Melanie and Louis proceed to the room, then take off their clothes and share a kiss. Louis gets on top of her, kissing and holding her, ushering another moment of intimacy between them. Back in town, Melanie rides back to her place. Chris is outside the apartment chilling when Melanie comes and tries to crack some jokes with him. Chris mentions Claire broke up with her, and Melanie encourages him to drink away his pain. He concurs, finishes the drink in his hand, and goes in to get another one.